All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're breaking down a really blistering critique of British policing. And this isn't from some outsider looking in. Nope, this is from someone who spent years on the inside, an ex-undercover detective with some pretty explosive claims. He's basically saying the system is broken, the streets have been given up, and that the courage to do the job right, well, that's been lost. And this right here, this quote from former undercover detective Peter Bleksley really sets the stage. Criminals have much more rights than victims. I mean, wow. That's a statement that cuts right to the heart of his entire argument, which is that the justice system, it's fundamentally tilted in completely the wrong direction. So let's unpack that. Let's see how he gets to such a really damning conclusion. So you might be wondering, who exactly is Peter Bleksley? Well, he's a veteran officer, and he spent years deep undercover, staring down some of the most dangerous criminals in the country. This isn't some academic in an ivory tower or a politician giving a speech. This is someone who has been right there on the front line. His entire perspective is shaped by decades of seeing crime up close and personal. Okay, so to really get where Bleksley is coming from with his critique of policing today, he says you have to go back. You have to understand how crime itself has completely changed. He paints this picture of a strategic retreat by the police. And it's a retreat that he says started decades ago, all because they were facing a totally new, more widespread type of crime. And this timeline here really shows that huge shift. Back in the 70s, Bleksley says the creme de la creme of criminals, right? They were armed robbers. They were hitting cash vans, super high risk, but super high reward. But then the 80s hit, and with it, a torrent of cocaine. And that changed everything. The top criminals suddenly realized, wait a minute, we can make insane profits with way less risk just by dealing drugs. And according to Bleksley, that one shift is what led directly to the mess we see on the streets today. And here's the direct fallout from that. As the drug trade just exploded, violence became, Bleksley calls it a currency. It's not just random anger, it's a business tool. It's used by dealers, and we're often talking about young teenagers here to protect their turf, their postcode. And this is his crucial point. So much of the knife crime we hear about, it's not random. It's a built-in, structural part of the modern drug business. So this is Bleksley's bottom line. He says the police sadly, tragically surrendered the streets to the criminals. He argues that while the top brass were saying, oh, we need to move our resources to crimes happening behind closed doors, the result was, catastrophic. It created this total vacuum on the streets, and you know who fills a vacuum? Criminals. And he says that led directly to the explosion in public violence we're dealing with now. All right, now we're getting into what is probably the most controversial part of Bleksley's whole testimony. This is where he alleges a complete failure of courage, right at the highest levels of policing. And it's a failure, he claims, that has had absolutely devastating consequences for some of the most vulnerable people in our society. So he asks a very direct and, frankly, challenging question. Why are some crimes being ignored? Because in his view, it's not just that the police have failed to solve certain crimes. He's saying they have actively chosen not to investigate them at all. And the reason why? Well, his answer is a pretty damning indictment of what he thinks is really driving the force these days. Okay, so let's break down this really explosive claim. Now, Bleksley alleges that there has been a deliberate cover-up when it comes to grooming gangs. He says the police and social workers literally looked the other way, and the reason given was racial sensitivities. He's very clear on this. He argues it's a fact that in the cases that did make it to court, the perpetrators were largely of Pakistani origin and the victims were predominantly young, white, vulnerable girls. And the reason for turning a blind eye? He claims it was fear. Fear of causing community unrest, or, just as damningly, fear of hurting their own chances for promotion. So, why? Why this alleged inaction? Well, Bleksley connects it directly to a fear of sparking huge civil unrest. He points to the 4 million Muslims living in the UK and argues that senior police officers are doing the math. They know they don't have the manpower or the resources to handle potential large-scale riots. So, in his words, they are simply afraid of the fallout. And because of that fear, they avoid confronting these really difficult issues inside certain communities. And this supposed lack of courage, according to Bleksley, well, it comes from the very top. He argues that the entire culture of police leadership has been, hollowed out. Corrupted even. And it's changed the fundamental nature of the job, and it's just completely demoralizing the actual officers on the ground. And look, he really doesn't mince words here. He says they're led by clowns, people who just want to climb that greasy pole of promotion.
He's describing a whole generation of senior leaders who he sees as just self-serving careerists, people willing to trample over anyone, including their own officers, just to get that next promotion. It's a picture of an organization that's driven by personal ambition, not public service.
And he really describes this deep culture clash between the way things were and the way they are now. Back in the day, he remembers a police force, a place where officers knew the law word perfect, where there was this incredible loyalty and camaraderie, and where you were trusted to use your own common sense. But now, he sees a social service, a place where leaders don't even know the law, where common sense has been stripped away, and the culture is just disconnected and all about serving yourself.
And the impact of all this on the frontline officers? Well, he claims it's been absolutely catastrophic. He says morale is completely on the floor. Officers are leaving the force in droves. And, just tragically, they're committing suicide in greater numbers than ever before. Why? Because they feel utterly betrayed by a management that he says would trash their careers in a heartbeat just to benefit themselves. So, this brings us full circle, right back to that quote we saw at the very beginning. Bleksley's argument is that all of these internal failures, giving up the streets, the crisis of courage, the awful leadership, it's all added up to a justice system that now prioritizes completely the wrong people. And here, Bleksley makes what he sees as a crucial legal point. Think about it. A criminal's rights, their right to sleep, to food, to a lawyer, that's all enshrined in law. It's legally protected and robust. But what about the victims? He points out that for them, there are only codes of conduct. They're not law. So if the system fails a victim, there's no legal comeback. None. And for Bleksley, this isn't just some small flaw in the system. It's a deep, deep shame upon this country. He sees this legal imbalance as a fundamental moral failure, a national disgrace that shows where our priorities really are, and he believes this is the real reason so many people have lost faith in the whole system.
And so that's where we're left. I mean, Bleksley's account paints a really grim picture, doesn't it? A nation living in fear, policed by a force that's in total crisis, and served by a justice system that he believes is tilted completely the wrong way. So the question his testimony really forces us all to ask is a pretty powerful one. If an insider's view is this bleak, what on earth is the future of public safety in Britain?